Hey guys, it's Christy with Christy's Custom Creations, and I have seen all over Facebook and TikTok the black flame candle, so I wanted to give my try at it, and I figured I would record it for everyone while I did. So here is how I have achieved this absolutely awesome looking black flame candle. So I've got a hot glue gun. This is actually the same hot glue gun that I used for my pickle tutorial, so if you did not see my pickle tutorial, I'll link it down in the description box below. I got this hot glue gun on Amazon. It was like $20. It was a really good deal, and it is super high heat. So I was really impressed with the hot glue gun whenever I did the pickle tutorial, so I figured I would give it a try for this black flame candle tutorial. So basically what I'm doing is I am creating wax drips, or they look like wax strips, with the hot glue gun. One thing I would have done just a little bit different is I would have given the hot glue gun just a little bit longer to warm up. This is a really high heat hot glue gun. It gets really good and hot, and I didn't give it quite long enough to warm up because I was really excited about going ahead and getting this tumbler started. So as I go on in the video, the drips get a little bit easier to do. But as you can see, I'm just basically starting at the top, and I'm kind of putting a pretty good sized glob of hot glue on there. And then I kind of just pull it down the cup, and you can even see me tap my cup on my workbench a couple of times, and that helps the hot glue that's still melted. It really helps it to kind of drip down on its own. So I love how it turned out. So what I'm doing here is I make my way all the way around the cup, and I'm just putting it on there and kind of helping pull it down, and then if you stand it up, it helps too. But I'm making my way all the way around the cup, and then once I kind of fill in this whole first layer of drips, I went back in and did a second layer of drips, and then I just kind of filled in any spots that looked like they needed to be filled in, basically. As you can see, as the hot glue dries, it becomes kind of white almost. As when it's really wet, that's when it's clear. So I'm now doing my second layer, and I ran through a pretty good amount of glue sticks here just because I really wanted those wax strips to really look real. So I put quite a bit on there, and it turned out really good. But this is one of those trust the process cups, because when I was watching some of the TikToks where other people had made them, they were like, just trust the process, trust the process. And when I first got started, I was like, oh, I don't know how this is going to turn out. But it actually ended turning out really cool. So definitely trust the process with this one, y'all. And I'm just going in with a second layer of the hot glue over my first layer here, and just working my way around. And you can really just play with it and let it kind of do its thing as the drips fall, but definitely let it get good and hot. And like a low temp hot glue gun I have some low temp hot glue guns from Hobby Lobby. Those would not be ideal for this. You definitely want one that's got a pretty high temp, that's gonna get that hot glue hot enough to where it will drip a little bit on its own. So just making my way around, and I'm going to continue to do that. I'm going to stop talking and chattering away, so I'm going to let you just watch me work my way around the cup and finish up these drips here. Okay, so now that I'm happy with my drips and how they turned out, I've got a craft knife, and very carefully pushing away from myself, I'm going to go in and just trim any little overlapping hot glue that I have that's trying to poke up a little bit. So like I said, cut away from yourself, don't cut towards yourself, don't cut your finger off, just very carefully trim that hot glue off the top of the cup, any of it that's poking up. So there you go. That's what my drips look like. And I did prep this tumbler beforehand by sanding it and then washing it and then wiping it down with acetone. So I am putting my 20-ounce tumbler here onto a football, and I have got some Krylon Color Max Gloss Black spray paint. So I went ahead and spray painted this gloss black, and I'm going to go in with a pigment powder that I actually sell on my website. And this color here is called Sphinx, and I completely at this point forgot to show y'all the the top of the container that showed the name, but it's Sphinx, and I do show it a little bit later in the video. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to burnish this pigment powder. It's a color shifting pigment powder, and I'm going to burnish it onto this tacky spray paint. The reason that I used gloss spray paint is because it remains tacky longer. It doesn't dry as fast as a matte spray paint does, so it stays tacky longer, and so that with that you can burnish it on, and it's going to hang on to that pigment powder. If it dries too quickly, then you're not going to be able to get that pigment powder on there and get it to stick. So that's why I use gloss whenever I burnish my pigment powders on. So any pigment powder that I drop, I kind of try to pick up. So what I'm doing here is over this tacky spray paint, I've got just a makeup brush. It's kind of like a blush brush that I got on Amazon. I got a whole pack of them on Amazon. And I'm just burnishing it onto this cup. You don't want to do it while the spray paint is super, super wet, because then it's obviously going to get all over your brush. But you can see the little bit of pigment powder kind of just like floating away in the air, because I'm kind of making a giant mess right now. But I'm just burnishing it on there, and it looks really, really cool. But you want to move fast because, like I said earlier, you don't want the spray paint to completely dry. You want it to just be tacky. Another way that you can do this, it probably wouldn't work out really well for this cup because you really want you want it to show all around the wax strips. But another way that you could do it is you can actually do it over tacky epoxy. So if you have a cup with epoxy on it, and you touch it and it's just tacky enough to kind of leave your fingerprint on there, you can do the same thing here, and you can actually burnish a mica powder or a pigment powder onto a cup that way. And as I mentioned before, I do sell this pigment powder along with lots of glitter on my website. So if you haven't checked it out yet, it's kccglitter.com. Check it out. I've got quite a few color shifting pigment powders on there, and then I've also got a lot of different glitter colors. So check them out. We release new glitter colors weekly. All right, so I'm pretty much wrapping this up. Look how cool that is, and that color shift. It's kind of like a gold to deep purple. It's just really neat. So now it is time for my first coat of epoxy. So I've got 20 milliliters of Tumblerpoxy epoxy mixed up here. I love Tumblerpoxy epoxy. I find that it is super clear, just a very beautiful glass-like finish. If you haven't tried Tumblerpoxy, you can check it out on my website. I do sell the small 16-ounce kits of it. So it's kind of like a trial kit, a starter kit. So check it out if you want to give it a try. If you have an epoxy that you already like, by all means, go ahead and use that epoxy that you already like. Tumblerpoxy here is my favorite epoxy. I use Tumblerpoxy, and then they have a fast set epoxy as well that is called Swiftpoxy, and those are my go-to epoxies that I use for all of my tumblers. So when applying this epoxy, I'm being very mindful, and I'm making sure that I get epoxy down in all those little ridges and everything where the hot glue has created the wax strips. So you want to make sure you get really good coverage in there. You don't want any bald spots left. Make sure you cover it up really good. So I have used this entire cup with the 20 milliliters of epoxy in there, and this is where I'm showing you now the color. It's called Sphinx. At that point I realized that I had forgotten to show it to everybody. So it's called Sphinx, and it comes in a little 1 gram container, and it's, like I said, it's on my website, kccglitter.com. So now that I've got pretty decent coverage of epoxy on the cup, I'm going to start at the bottom of the cup, and I'm going to push all the way up the cup, working my way around the cup, just making sure that everything is nice and smooth, and as smooth as it's going to get over those hot glue drips there. So just start at the bottom, work my way up as the cup spins all the way around, and then once I get all the way around, I'm going to take my finger and just make a swipe across the bottom. You don't ever want to forget your bottom there. So I make a swipe across the bottom just so that I don't have any epoxy buildup down there, and it's nice and smooth down there too. And then now I have my blowtorch. I got my blowtorch on Amazon. It's just like a culinary blowtorch, and I'm just making really super fast passes across the cup with the flame very lightly touching the epoxy, and that's going to kill any micro bubbles that are trying to hang out, and it's also going to make sure that that epoxy is nice and smooth. Alright, so now that I have got this first coat of epoxy nice and dry, I have created a water slide, and I actually printed this water slide here. It's for the Black Flame Candle Company. I found it on Etsy, and I printed it on white water slide. Y'all, I absolutely hate trying to do print and cut. So I printed it on white water slide, and I cut it out myself with scissors. I hate using print and cut. So scissors worked for me here. And also that little cradle thing that I have my tumbler sitting on, I get that on Etsy, or got it on Etsy from Hootyful Creations. That is my go-to tumbler cradle. I literally use it for all of my tumblers whenever I'm applying decals or anything like that. You'll see it. I'm sure you've seen it in my other tutorials. I absolutely love that thing. So my water slide, like I said, I printed it on white water slide paper. It is Blingasm water slide paper, and I sealed it in 4 times with Rust-Oleum 2X Gloss Clear. So I'm just going to soak it long enough so that the water slide paper releases from the backing. It was kind of being just a little bit stubborn, so I was helping it along here, just helping it to kind of loosen from the backing and get the water up underneath it. Whenever you apply the water slide to a tumbler, you want to make sure that the tumbler is wet first. So as you saw just a minute ago, I kind of wet the cup a little bit, and now that it's ready to slide off, it just slides very freely off the backing there. And I'm going to kind of just eyeball it, try to make sure I've got it lined up nicely, and then I will actually take a little bit of a tape measure because I'm a perfectionist. I want a little bit of a tape measure. That made no sense. So I'm going to take a tape measure, and I'm going to measure it just so that it lines up perfectly. I don't want it sitting on there sideways. And then for my water slides, I like to use an old soft cotton washcloth, and I just mash down on it really good initially to kind of help mash it into place, and then I very, very carefully take my cotton washcloth and I just smooth it out, smooth that water slide down. I push any water out from underneath it, and there you have it. You need to make sure and let your water slide completely dry. I usually let it dry overnight. If I'm in a hurry, then I let it dry 1 or 2 hours. Just make sure it's dry before you apply your epoxy. Look how cool that Black Flame Candle tumbler looks. It doesn't even look like a cup. It's so incredibly simple, yet it looks so cool. So now it is time for our last coat of epoxy. For the last coat of epoxy here, I have got another 20 milliliters of Tumblerpoxy epoxy mixed up, and I'm going to get my glove on and apply it with that. Always make sure that you use proper PPE, personal protection equipment, when working with epoxy. You want to wear a respirator, you want to wear gloves, you don't want it all on your skin. Epoxy is considered toxic until it has cured for 24 hours. So while you're working with it wet, it is considered toxic. So be sure to wear your proper PPE and protect yourself, your kids, your pets, and everything while you're working with it. Just be careful, be smart with it. So I am just going to do the exact same thing you saw me do earlier, and I'm going to put this epoxy onto the tumbler here. I'm going to get really good coverage, and I'm going to use the entire 20 milliliters. For tumblers, I personally, if it's a non-glitter tumbler, I usually like to put 3 coats of epoxy on the cup because I feel like it gives the cup better protection against cracking or chipping on the bottom. This tumbler here, it turned out so nice and smooth, and I didn't want to take away from the dimension from the drips up top, so I just left it at 2 coats for this cup. But like I said, usually most cups that are non-glitter cups, I usually put 3 coats of epoxy on there because I personally feel like it better protects that cup just a little bit. So I have smoothed it out. I'm going to hit it with my blowtorch, let it do its last spin, and I will let it dry for probably 10 or 12 hours before I handle this cup, it being the last coat. I don't want to mess it up, so I want to make sure it's completely dry before I handle it. So as I mentioned before, pretty much all the products that I use I get on Amazon, and then the pigment powder Sphinx here that I used I have on my website at kccglitter.com. Look how beautiful that is. I have lots of other colors if you want to check them out, but I absolutely love how this turned out. I'm going to be giving this tumbler here away in my Patreon group. And if you have not checked out my Patreon group, I've got a link for it down below. And as always, I want to say a huge thank you to all of my awesome Patreon members. Your support means the world to me, and your support means the world to me, y'all. You have no idea how much I appreciate it. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to see more like it. And as always, I hope y'all have a great day. Take care.